What do you think are the top 5 DPSs as of 6.0? Neuvillette fell off hard after his Siege and Onslaught, so I think it would be interesting to hear your opinion. Yeah, that's a good question. We can talk about it a little bit. So, like, the characters that are at least worth talking about, I'll include more than 5 for now. Who else? Obviously, we'll talk about Linz as well. Kinich? No, I don't think Kinich warrants a discussion here. Like, 6E perfect gameplay Kinich is not better than these characters, so I don't think it's really worth talking about. The thing with Neuvillette is, this is something I've talked about since, like, the early Neuvillette leaks, right? This shit is frying me. What is that? I get. Since the early Neuvillette leaks, I've talked about this. Neuvillette's kit inherently just works well and lends itself well to non-hyper carry teams. Neuvillette is a character that gives you an incentive to have noticeable personal damage from the rest of your team. Right after Neuvillette's release, we got a character that pushed him into a pseudo hyper carry playstyle with Farina, and at the start of that one, we got a slight buff to that playstyle with Shilonen. But since then, we've actually had multiple buffs to the alternatives. Neuvillette is a character who gets a lot of his value from his quality of life. And in content like Abyss, where the DPS check is much lower than a general reasonable assumption of investment for someone who plays the game fairly often, quality of life is much more important than ceiling. The number you're actually interested in is not what GC Sim tells you the team DPS is, it's how long does it take the specific player piloting the team to kill an enemy with X amount of HP, right? And in content where the DPS check is much lower than the actual DPS, characters for which it is easier to achieve that threshold of clearing with 3 stars in time will generally be better than characters for which it is harder to achieve that threshold, even if the ceiling is significantly higher. But Siege and Onslaught changed things. Siege and Onslaught gave us content where the DPS check is not significantly below your actual team DPS anymore. There's going to be a lot of content where it's just barely below your actual DPS. And at that point, it becomes a bit more complicated, right? Let's make a graph, okay? So this is gonna be Neuvillette, okay? This is gonna be Mavuika. So when it comes to Neuvillette, it's hard to fuck things up. As long as you have just a very, very surface level understanding of what your characters do, you'll generally do the Neuvillette things properly, and the DPS you'll be losing out on is from time lost when you're not sure which unit to swap to and you swap to the wrong one by accident, or you get staggered in the middle of a charge attack, or whatever, right? But generally what ends up happening is a average player will get this amount of DPS in practice, and a good player that doesn't reset will get this amount of DPS in practice. What about Mavuika? Well, with Mavuika, there's a few more things that can go wrong. If you swap to the units in the wrong order in a Mavuika team, you just don't melt. Just losing your melt by itself brings you here. And when you add in potential gameplay difficulties and stuff like that, time added to swapping to the wrong unit, the possibility for enemies to be in a state where you can't hit them, or a high resistance state when your burst hits, the average player's lower bound for DPS with Mavuika is gonna be here. However, an okay-ish Mavuika player that at least melts the initial hit and at least 1 or 2 charge attacks will generally be around here, and a good Mavuika player will be around here, right? So if your DPS check is here, with Neuvillette, you never go below this, even if you fucking suck at the game. With Mavuika, you can go below this. However, if your DPS check, your DPS requirement is here, then with Neuvillette, you need to actually optimize your rotations and understand what you're doing fairly well to go past that. With Mavuika, you pretty much just need to meld the initial hit. And if you're a bad player, and when you don't meld the initial hit, you can just press the fucking retry button, and it's not the end of the world. It's easy to tell what went right or what went wrong when what you missed is melting your initial hit. Abyss DPS requirement is here. Siege and Onslaught difficulty 5 DPS requirement is this one, and difficulty 6 is here, right? And so for Abyss type content that is balanced around Abyss difficulty, a character like Neuvillette, despite having a much lower ceiling, is actually going to generally perform as well, if not better than Mavuika. A casual player's fastest clear with Mavuika will be faster than their fastest clear with Neuvillette, but they might need to retry a few times with Mavuika, and they will not need to retry with Neuvillette. But for Siege and Onslaught, a fairly casual player can clear with Mavuika, but they will never clear with Neuvillette because they just don't have the skill to reach this or to go over this. And then for Dire, right, you need to bring this bar above, and you do generally do that either with like incredibly fucking great gameplay, right? Like here, you can probably kind of get there with really good artifacts. But for most people, it's generally you think about Dire through constellations or signatures, and with Neuvillette, C0R0 can get there, but only at perfect gameplay, right? For most people, they'll need something more even. Whereas with Mavuika, R1 is enough, right? All of this to say, Neuvillette is still just as good for Abyss. Neuvillette is still arguably the best character in the game for Abyss type content. But Stygian Onslaught is more difficult than Abyss. If you are able to clear Stygian Onslaught, you are able to clear Abyss. And so being very good at Abyss type content is just not nearly as impactful as being good at Stygian Onslaught type content. Does that mean Neuvillette is bad? No, obviously not. Because even in Stygian Onslaught, he's still pretty good. I don't really like thinking about the game in terms of constellations, right? I started doing it a bit more because of my EU account, but that's not the main thing I want to focus on. So for now, let's talk about C0R0 Fearless difficulty optimization. I wonder what the top 5 would be for this. Like, Mavuika and Skirk are definitely in there, so let's think about the rest now. The thing with Arlecchino is, like, I feel like she could make it, but the fact that a lot of her good teams are just Mavuika teams but worse is kind of a big downside. Except for Overload. Yeah, but if you're looking at Overload Arlecchino, she's just Verissa but way worse. That can change a bit when you start looking at constellation stuff, because Arlecchino's early constellations are not completely dog shit like versus C1 is. But like for C0R0 stuff, which I've made very clear is the main thing I'm focusing on right now. Yeah, yeah. So I don't think I would include Arlecchino in my top 5 nowadays. So I need to choose 3 units out of these 4, with this being Flint's. Llama. The question was for carries, and Llama doesn't really fit the definition of a carry. I do think Llama teams are in the top 5 like teams, but the question was about carries. Isn't Flynn's a bit too restrictive? Yes and no. You need to ask yourself, what does restrictive mean and why is it a downside? Restrictive means that you don't have that many variations, right? It means that you're fairly limited in the different things you can do. But why is that a downside? Why do you need to be able to do multiple different teams? I think being restrictive is not nearly that as bad as people think it is nowadays, to not get walled by elemental checks. The reality is that they are designing Stygian Onslaught to wall, like you said, units regardless of their element, right? Like, sure, Turtle's pretty bad for electro carries because it has high electro resistance, but even if it didn't have high electro resistance, you wouldn't play electro carries there because the electro carries all have a lot of hits. Good luck walling off my C6 Mavuika 250k DPS team. Just you wait for the pyro slime boss in Abyss. Bro, every time I see invulnerable to pyro damage in my fucking weekly reputation bounties, I shiver on the EU account. 250k DPS with C6 Mavuika. Mavuika vertical investment is generally pretty multiplicative, which means that if you have like C0R0 Mavuika, you'll be at like, oh, it should probably be a bit higher than 250k. But it'll be like 350k. But like C6R1 Mavuika with C2 Citlali will be at like 900k. No, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but like, you get the idea. Skirk was kind of cooked in current Abyss, especially if you didn't have Citlali because she's so restrictive. Do you mean the last Abyss? Or current Abyss? Why would she be cooked without Citlali? Against Nalan's Secret Source? Skirk can brute force this so easily. To climb the pillars. Oh yeah, I guess most people don't do the pillar tech, huh? Oh, you can use Dahlia, that's true! I forgot Dahlia wait, is that why they gave Dahlia the jump? It actually might be why they gave Dahlia the jump. That's so funny. When you say Versa versatility is a great point for her in Stygian Onslaught compared to Flynn's, that can only be played in Electro slash Hyperloom. I mean, in what way? What's content that would be good for Verissa but bad for Flynn's? I guess that's not true. There is content like that. Pyro Aura enemies is like that, but that's kind of it. Papilla wouldn't be that bad for Flynn's. But also, I feel like Night Soul stuff being bad for non-Natlan character is the equivalent of Nodcry stuff being bad for non-Lunar characters. So like, it works both ways. And like, in my eyes, that part, they cancel each other out. It's pretty much just the Lava Dragon stuff hydro immune enemies. Those are good for Flynn's. Flynn's teams do basically 0 hydro damage, so they don't get hurt by hydro immune enemies. But then on top of that, if those enemies also have a hydro aura, you can play Shovel's Flynn's, and that's fucking insanely strong. Like against Olpa, Flynn's is like probably the best C0R0 team you can do against Olpa, actually. Calkit, I did. It's over 150k DPS. It's really good, chat. Where's Mavuika and Nefa? Yeah, that's what I was looking at. Anyways, honestly, I feel like all 4 of these are like kind of on the same pedestal, depending. Like each of these could be the best one depending on your specific assumptions, right? Neuvillette is the best at dealing with Abyss type content. Mualani is the character that gets to dire levels of investment the more easily. Verissa is the character that gets to fearless levels of investment the most easily. And Flynn's is kind of like the second best at in all of these categories. So then I think it becomes a question of whether you can make them work with the other carries, right? You're assuming that you're playing Mavuika and Citlali, or sorry, Mavuika and Skirk. Which of the remaining characters would be the best on your last team? So I guess Neuvillette is probably the one that's hardest to make work as the third one, because neither of these characters use any of Flynn's best teammates. For Verissa, Mavuika can use the Ansan, but she also has other options, and Mavuika can be a Verissa support, but she also has other options, so you don't really get punished too hard from playing Verissa when Mavuika's on another team. Molani, same thing. Shiloden is good for Mavuika, but she has other options. Molani is good for Mavuika is good for Molani, but she has other options. But then with Neuvillette, you have to ditch Farina on your Skirk team or on your Neuvillette team, and right now that's actually kind of a big deal. That being said, I do see that potentially changing with Columbina. I kind of expect Columbina to fucking knock Farina out of Neuvillette's teams. I would be so for real. But yeah, so I guess Neuvillette is out of my top 5 now. That's crazy. End of an era, yeah. I mean, I said all that, but I'd still rather shoot myself in real life than have to play Molani. So maybe I still put Neuvillette here because like it feels wrong. It just feels so wrong to have Molani like alongside these 4 units.
Deuce on the loose.
Yeah.
Deuce on the loose.
Deuce on the loose.